All right, let's dive into something we all know a little too well, I think, respiratory infections.
Yeah, everybody's experienced a cold, at least probably more than a few, right?
Exactly. But there's a lot more to these infections than just feeling a little sniffly.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to use this OpenStack's microbiology textbook to guide us. We'll be focusing on the chapter about respiratory system infections.
It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
I think people might be really surprised to learn just how many bacteria and viruses can cause these infections, and some of them are a lot more serious.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So we'll break it all down from the common cold to some of the rarer but more dangerous infections.
Okay.
But before we jump into all the different invaders out there, I think we should start with a quick tour of the respiratory system itself, just to set the stage.
Sounds good.
All right, so you take a breath.
Air comes in through your nose and mouth,
Okay.
travels down this pathway called the pharynx, and then hits your larynx, which is your voice box. And from there, it goes into the trachea, which is also called the windpipe.
The windpipe, right. So then what? Air goes down the windpipe, and then what happens?
Then the trachea splits off into these two tubes called bronchi,
Okay.
which keep branching out into smaller and smaller tubes called bronchioles.
Okay.
Think of it kind of like an upside-down tree, with the trunk being the trachea and all those branches spreading out inside your lungs.
Right. I gotcha.
Yeah.
So at the very end of those tiny branches are the alveoli,
Right.
the little air sacs where the magic of gas exchange happens.
Exactly, yeah. So oxygen from the air passes into your bloodstream through the alveoli, and then carbon dioxide from your blood goes back into the air so you can breathe it out.
It's pretty amazing.
Pretty neat system, huh?
It is. But also it seems like it'd be super easy for, like, germs to get in there.
You would think so, right?
Yeah.
But actually, the lower part of your respiratory system, where the alveoli are, is usually sterile, meaning there are no microbes hanging out down there.
Really? So how does the body keep all those germs out?
Well, one way is through this awesome mechanism called the mucociliary escalator.
That's a big word.
It is a mouthful. Imagine like a conveyor belt lined with tiny hair-like structures called cilia.
Okay.
And these cilia are constantly sweeping upward.
Okay. I'm picturing it. So what's on the conveyor belt?
Mucus. Your respiratory tract produces mucus, which traps all sorts of stuff you breathe in, like dust, pollen, and yes, microbes too.
So it's like a sticky trap for germs.
Exactly. And the cilia constantly move this mucus upward, carrying all those trapped particles up towards your throat, where you can either cough them out or swallow them.
So the body's got its own little cleaning crew.
Yeah, it's like your body's own cleaning crew working 24/7 to keep your lungs clear.
That's incredible. You really appreciate how complex our bodies are. But of course, as we all know, those defenses don't always work perfectly.
Unfortunately, that's right.
Sometimes those microbes manage to break through and cause infections.
Yeah, and there's a whole army of them out there, bacteria, viruses, even fungi.
Yeah.
Let's start with some of the bacterial troublemakers, shall we?
Let's do it. I think a good place to start is with a bacteria we're probably all familiar with, Streptococcus pyogenes,
Oh, yeah.
better known as the cause of strep throat.
Strep throat.
Yeah.
Most people have experienced that, that painful sore throat, the fever, sometimes even white patches on the tonsils. It's especially common in kids, but adults get it too.
Yeah, I remember reading in the textbook that strep throat can actually be more than just a pain in the neck.
Yeah,
If it's not treated, there's a risk of complications.
that's right. Things like scarlet fever, which causes this very distinctive rash,
Right.
and then rheumatic fever, which can damage the heart valves.
Wow.
These are rare but serious complications of strep throat, and it all comes down to how the bacteria's toxins affect different parts of the body. So if you suspect strep throat, see a doctor, get on antibiotics right away.
Another bacterial infection that's all too familiar, especially if you have young kids, is otitis media,
Oh, yeah.
the dreaded ear infections.
Middle ear infections are super common, especially in kids under 2 years old, and there's a reason for that.
Okay.
The eustachian tube, which connects the middle ear to the back of the throat, is shorter and more horizontal in kids, making it easier for fluid and bacteria to get trapped there.
Oh, so it's like a design flaw in the tiny human model.
In a way, yeah, it's just one of those things that makes little ones more prone to ear infections. And the usual suspects are bacteria like Streptococcus pneumonia, Haemophilus influenza, and Moraxella catarrhalis.
Okay, those names are definitely a mouthful.
Yeah, they are.
but it's good to know what to look out for.
Absolutely. And while these bacteria are usually the culprits behind ear infections, they can cause other respiratory problems in both kids and adults.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the more serious bacterial infections. One that comes to mind is diphtheria,
Yeah.
caused by Corynebacterium diphtheria.
Diphtheria is a good example of how scary these infections can be if they're left unchecked. It can cause this thick, grayish membrane to form in the back of the throat,
Right.
making it incredibly difficult to breathe.
That's what the textbook called a pseudomembrane.
Yeah,
Sounds pretty terrifying.
it can be. And the diphtheria bacteria also produce toxins that can damage the heart and nerves. But here's the good news. We have vaccines that are very effective at preventing diphtheria. That's why you don't really hear about it that much anymore.
It's a reminder that vaccines are lifesavers.
Absolutely. And speaking of vaccines, let's talk about pertussis, or whooping cough.
Right.
It's another highly contagious bacterial infection that can be really dangerous, especially for babies.
Whooping cough is caused by Bordetella pertussis, and it gets its name from that awful gasping sound people make when they cough.
Yeah.
It's like they can't quite catch their breath.
Exactly. Those coughing fits can be so severe they can even cause vomiting or make it hard to sleep. But luckily, we have vaccines that protect against pertussis.
Now let's delve into another serious bacterial infection that's been making headlines a lot lately. Bacterial pneumonia?
Yeah, pneumonia is a lung infection that causes the alveoli, remember those tiny air sacs we talked about?
Right.
To fill up with fluid,
Oh, wow.
making it really hard to breathe.
So it's like your lungs are drowning.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And what's really concerning about bacterial pneumonia is that some of the bacteria that cause it, like Streptococcus pneumonia, are becoming resistant to antibiotics.
Yeah, antibiotic resistance is a huge problem.
Yeah.
It makes treating these infections so much harder.
It really does. It highlights the importance of using antibiotics responsibly and, developing new ways to fight these resistant bacteria.
Yeah, definitely. Another bacterial infection that I think is worth discussing is tuberculosis, or TB for short.
Yeah.
Caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It's been around for centuries.
TB is a fascinating infection from a biological standpoint. The bacteria have this incredible ability to survive inside immune cells,
Really?
forming these little nodules called tubercles in the lungs.
Wait, so the bacteria can actually live inside your immune cells?
It is, yeah. These tubercles can remain dormant for years, meaning someone can have what's called latent TB without even knowing it.
So you could be infected but not actually sick.
Exactly. But if the immune system becomes weakened, the TB can reactivate and cause what we call active disease, which is much more serious.
And treating TB is no walk in the park, right?
Yeah, it can be a really long process, often requiring multiple antibiotics taken over several months. And unfortunately, we're seeing more cases of drug-resistant TB, which makes treatment even more challenging. All right, so we've explored some of the bacterial bad guys that can cause respiratory infections, but now let's turn our attention to the viral world.
The viral world. They're
Yeah.
like the ninjas of the microbial world.
That's a great analogy.
Always lurking in the shadows, ready to strike.
And just like ninjas, they come in all shapes and sizes, causing a wide range of respiratory infections, from the common cold to some pretty serious diseases.
And I think it's safe to say that we've all had our fair share of run-ins with the common cold. It seems like no matter how hard we try to avoid it, we always end up catching a cold at some point.
The common cold is like that annoying neighbor who always drops by unannounced. And here's something that might surprise you.
Okay.
There are over 200 different viruses that can cause the common cold.
Wait, 200? Seriously?
Yeah.
No wonder there's no cure for the common cold. It's like trying to hit a moving target.
Exactly. We're talking rhinoviruses, coronaviruses, adenoviruses. The list goes on and on.
Wow.
They spread like wildfire through droplets when someone coughs or sneezes, and they can also linger on surfaces just waiting for you to touch them.
So basically, the common cold is a master of disguise and transmission.
You could say that. And while most colds are mild and go away on their own within a week or two, they can really knock you down for a few days.
Yeah, they can. Speaking of viruses that can knock you down, let's talk about influenza, or the flu, as it's more commonly known. This one's definitely no joke.
Yeah, influenza is a serious respiratory infection that can cause all sorts of nasty symptoms, from fever and chills to muscle aches and fatigue. And in some cases, it can lead to complications like pneumonia, which can be life-threatening, especially for the very young, the elderly, and people with weakened immune systems.
Right. I remember reading about the 1918 influenza pandemic in the textbook. It's hard to believe that a virus could cause so much devastation worldwide.
The 1918 pandemic was a tragic reminder of how quickly influenza can spread and how deadly it can be. Millions of people died from the virus, and it had a profound impact on societies around the world.
Yeah, it's really scary to think about. What makes influenza so challenging is its ability to constantly change, right?
Right.
The textbook mentions something called antigenic drift and antigenic shift.
Yeah.
Can you explain what those are?
Think of it this way. Antigenic drift is like the flu virus changing clothes.
Right.
It's constantly making small changes to its surface proteins. These are the parts that our immune system recognizes.
So it's like the virus is putting on new disguise.
Exactly. And because of these gradual changes, our immune system might not recognize the virus as easily, which is why we need a new flu vaccine every year. Scientists have to predict which strains of the virus are going to be circulating and create a vaccine that targets those specific strains.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about antigenic shift?
Antigenic shift is a much bigger change. It's like the virus is undergoing a complete makeover. Imagine two different flu viruses infecting the same cell and swapping genetic material.
So it's like a genetic party and a whole new hybrid virus emerges.
You got it. And these major shifts are what can lead to pandemics because our immune systems have never seen this new hybrid virus before.
So it's a constant game of cat and mouse between our immune systems and these ever-evolving viruses.
It is. But thankfully, we have vaccines and antiviral medications that can help us stay ahead of the game.
Okay, let's talk about some other viral infections that can affect the respiratory system. One that comes to mind is respiratory syncytial virus, or RSV, which I know can be really tough on young kids.
RSV is a very common respiratory virus, and most kids will have been infected with it by the time they're 2 years old.
So it's like a rite of passage for the little ones?
Pretty much. And for most kids, RSV just causes mild cold-like symptoms. But for babies, especially those born prematurely or with underlying health conditions, it can be much more serious.
Yeah. The textbook mentioned that RSV can cause bronchiolitis, which is an inflammation of the small airways in the lungs.
That's right. Bronchiolitis can make it difficult for babies to breathe, and they may need to be hospitalized for treatment. It's definitely something parents and caregivers should be aware of, especially during RSV season, which usually peaks in the fall and winter.
So what can parents do to protect their little ones from RSV?
Good hand hygiene is crucial, as is avoiding close contact with people who are sick. And for babies who are at high risk of complications, there's a medication called palivizumab that can help protect them from serious RSV infections.
Now, the textbook also mentioned two other coronaviruses that have caused global concern in recent decades: SARS and MERS. These sound pretty scary.
They are. SARS, or severe acute respiratory syndrome, first emerged in 2003 and caused a global outbreak. It had a high mortality rate, which means that a significant percentage of people who got infected died from the disease.
That's alarming. What about MERS?
MERS, or Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, emerged in 2012 and is still circulating today, primarily in the Middle East. It also has a high mortality rate and is thought to have originated in camels.
Camels. Wow. These emerging coronaviruses really highlight the importance of global surveillance and preparedness when it comes to infectious diseases.
I couldn't agree more. We live in an interconnected world, and diseases can spread rapidly across borders. It's crucial that we have systems in place to quickly detect and respond to new threats.
Okay, let's round out our discussion of viral respiratory infections with a trio of classic childhood diseases: measles, mumps, and rubella. I remember getting vaccinated for all three of these when I was a kid.
Those vaccines have been incredibly successful in reducing the incidence of these diseases, but we still see outbreaks, especially in communities with low vaccination rates.
Right. The textbook mentioned that measles, in particular, can be very serious.
Measles is highly contagious and can cause complications like pneumonia, encephalitis, which is inflammation of the brain, and even death. It's one of those diseases that people tend to underestimate because they think of it as just a childhood rash. But it can be much more than that.
So it's not just a harmless childhood illness.
Not at all. And mumps can lead to complications like meningitis and hearing loss. Rubella, while usually mild, can cause serious birth defects if a pregnant woman gets infected.
So getting vaccinated against these diseases is really important, not just for individual protection, but also for the health of our communities.
Absolutely. Vaccination is one of the most effective ways to protect ourselves and those around us from these potentially serious viral infections.
All right. We've covered bacteria and viruses, but let's not forget about the fungi lurking in the environment. While fungal infections of the respiratory system are less common, they can be just as serious. especially for people with compromised immune systems.
That's right, we breathe in fungal spores all the time, but our immune systems usually do a great job of keeping them in check. However, if someone's immune system is weakened, those spores can take hold and cause infections.
So for someone with a healthy immune system, breathing in fungal spores isn't usually a big deal.
Right. It's like having a strong security system in your house. Most of the time, it keeps intruders out. But if the security system is down, it's much easier for someone to break in.
That's a good analogy. So what are some of the fungal infections that can affect the respiratory system?
Well, one example is histoplasmosis, which is caused by a fungus called Histoplasma capsulatum. This fungus is often found in soil that's been enriched with bird or bat droppings, especially in the Mississippi River Valley.
So if you're exploring caves or working with soil in that region, you might want to be extra careful.
Exactly. Inhaling the spores of histoplasma can lead to an infection called histoplasmosis, which can cause flu-like symptoms and sometimes even more serious lung problems.
Another fungal infection that the textbook mentioned is coccidioidomycosis, or valley fever, as it's often called.
Yeah. Valley fever is caused by a fungus called coccidioides, which is found in the soil in certain arid regions, like the southwestern United States. When the soil is disturbed, the fungal spores can become airborne, and if you breathe them in, you can get infected.
So it's like the fungus is lying in wait, just waiting for the wind to kick up some dust.
That's a good way to put it, and the symptoms of valley fever can range from mild to severe, and in some cases, it can even spread beyond the lungs to other parts of the body.
That's scary. Are there any other fungal infections we should be aware of?
Another one to keep on your radar is blastomycosis, which is caused by the fungus Blastomyces. This one is less common than histoplasmosis or valley fever, but it can be just as serious.
And where is this Blastomyces fungus found?
It's typically found in soil and decomposing wood in the eastern and central United States and Canada. And like valley fever, it can sometimes spread from the lungs to other parts of the body, causing a disseminated infection.
Disseminated infection, what does that mean?
It means that the infection has spread beyond the initial site of infection, in this case the lungs, and has traveled to other organs or systems in the body.
So these fungal infections are definitely nothing to sneeze at, even if they're less common than bacterial or viral infections.
That's right. It's important to be aware of the risks and to take precautions if you're traveling to areas where these fungi are prevalent, especially if you have a weakened immune system.
All right. We've journeyed through the world of bacteria, viruses, and fungi,
Yeah,
and it's been quite an adventure.
it has.
We've learned about how these microbes can invade our respiratory systems, causing a wide range of infections, from the common cold to some pretty serious and potentially life-threatening diseases.
It's amazing how our bodies have these incredible defense mechanisms to fight off these invaders, but sometimes they manage to slip through the cracks. It really is a constant battle between our bodies and these microbes. But the good news is we're not defenseless. We have knowledge on our side, and knowledge, as they say, is power.
That's so true. And speaking of knowledge, I have a question that's been bugging me.
Okay.
We've talked about all these incredible defenses our bodies have, like the mucociliary escalator.
Right.
But if they're so effective, why are respiratory infections still so common? It seems like we're always hearing about somebody coming down with a cold or the flu.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something that scientists are still trying to fully understand. But one of the key factors is that these microbes are constantly evolving. Viruses especially are masters of change. They mutate, they swap genes, they're always finding new ways to outsmart our immune systems.
So it's like an ongoing arms race.
Exactly. Our immune systems adapt to fight off the microbes we've encountered before, but then the microbes change and the cycle starts all over again.
That makes sense. It's like trying to hit a moving target. But it's not just about the microbes themselves, right? There are other factors that can make us more susceptible to respiratory infections, like environmental factors, as this textbook mentioned.
Absolutely. Think about air pollution, for example. When we breathe in polluted air, it can irritate and damage our lungs, making it easier for infections to take hold.
So even if our immune system is working properly, environmental factors can weaken our defenses.
That's right. And exposure to cigarette smoke can also damage the lungs and increase the risk of respiratory infections.
It all comes back to protecting our lungs and keeping them healthy.
Exactly. And another factor to consider is individual variation in immune response. Some people simply have stronger immune systems than others, either due to genetics or lifestyle factors.
So some people are just naturally better at fighting off infections.
It seems that way, yeah. And age is a big factor too. Babies and young children haven't fully developed their immune systems yet, which is why they're more prone to infections.
Yeah.
And as we get older, our immune systems tend to weaken, making us more susceptible to infections as well.
So it's like our immune systems are at their peak in adulthood, and then it's all downhill from there.
In a way, yeah. But there are things we can do throughout our lives to support our immune systems and reduce our risk of infections.
Okay, like what? Give us the tips.
Well, vaccination is one of the most effective ways to protect ourselves from serious respiratory infections.
Okay.
Vaccines work by exposing our immune systems to a weakened or inactive form of a virus or bacteria,
Okay.
allowing our bodies to build up defenses without actually getting sick.
So it's like giving our immune system a sneak peek at the enemy so they're prepared for a real attack.
Exactly. And vaccines have been incredibly successful in preventing diseases like measles, mumps, rubella, pertussis, and influenza. They've saved countless lives and continue to be a cornerstone of public health.
Besides vaccines, what else can we do to protect ourselves?
Good hygiene practices are essential. Washing your hands frequently, especially before eating or touching your face, can help prevent the spread of germs. Covering your mouth and nose when you cough or sneeze can also help reduce the spread of respiratory droplets.
Those are simple habits, but they can make a big difference.
They really can. And if you do get sick, it's important to stay home and rest so you can recover and prevent spreading the infection to others.
It's all about being mindful of our own health and the health of those around us.
Exactly. And if you're concerned about your risk of respiratory infections, talk to your doctor. They can assess your individual situation and provide personalized advice.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into the worlds of respiratory infections. We've learned so much about the different microbes that can cause these infections, the ways our bodies defend against them, and the steps we can take to protect ourselves.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey, and I hope our listeners have gained a newfound appreciation for the complexity of our respiratory systems and the importance of keeping them healthy.
We've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about bacteria, viruses, and fungi, all those little things that can wreak havoc on our respiratory systems. But the good news is we're not powerless against them. We have knowledge on our side, and that knowledge empowers us to make informed decisions about our health. So stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay healthy.